The sun was only beginning to rise over the jagged mountains of eastern Afghanistan, painting the horizon in pale orange and dusty gray. Inside a forward operating base carved into the rugged terrain, Captain Daniel Morgan laced his boots with quiet focus. At 34, he had already served 2 tours in Iraq, but Afghanistan was different, more unpredictable, more personal. He knew every morning could be the last for him or for one of the men he led, and that knowledge weighed heavily on his shoulders. His soldiers trusted him with their lives, and he carried that responsibility like armor. That day's mission was to push deeper into a valley that intelligence reported as a Taliban stronghold. Villages clung to the cliffs, and narrow dirt roads wound like veins through the mountains. It was the kind of terrain where ambushes weren't just possible, they were expected. Still, Daniel briefed his men calmly, with steady eyes and a reassuring voice. He knew the secret to leadership wasn't bravado, it was the quiet conviction that if danger came, he would be the first into the fire and the last to leave. Their convoy of Humvees rolled out, dust swirling around the tires, rifles bristling from every angle. Daniel sat behind the gunner, scanning the ridges. He'd memorized every face in his unit, knew who had kids waiting back home, who loved baseball, who was saving for college. They weren't just soldiers to him, they were brothers. And if this valley swallowed them, he would never forgive himself. Halfway through the narrow road, the first explosion ripped the silence apart. The lead vehicle was hit by an IED buried beneath the dirt. The deafening blast sent shrapnel flying, flipping the Humvee onto its side. Smoke billowed into the air, and the valley erupted with gunfire. The Taliban had been waiting. Bullets slammed into the armored vehicles, and rockets streaked from the cliffs. Chaos threatened to take over, but Daniel's voice cut through the storm. "Get to cover. Return fire. Medic forward." His commands were sharp, practiced, and urgent. He pulled the wounded driver from the smoking wreckage, dragging him by his vest while rounds cracked against the rocks around him. Blood soaked the soldier's uniform, but he was alive, and Daniel refused to let him die in that valley. Pinned down and outnumbered, the unit fought with ferocity, but the enemy had the high ground. Daniel grabbed the radio, calling for air support, but bad weather had grounded helicopters. They were on their own. He made the decision to push uphill, to take the fight directly to the ambushers. With covering fire laid down by his squad, he led a small team up the rocky incline, climbing with bare hands and sheer will. The climb felt endless, every inch contested by gunfire and grenades. At one point, a Taliban fighter appeared from behind a boulder, rifle raised. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired, saving his men from certain death. They pushed onward, hearts pounding, until they reached the enemy's firing position. What followed was brutal, close-quarters combat, fought with rifles, sidearms, and even fists when ammunition ran dry. Daniel was hit by shrapnel in his shoulder, pain searing through his body, but he kept moving, kept fighting, refusing to surrender an inch. After nearly an hour of relentless battle, they cleared the ridge. The gunfire below weakened, the ambush broken. The surviving Taliban fighters melted into the mountains, leaving silence behind. The valley was scarred with smoke and blood, but Daniel's men were alive, shaken, wounded, but alive. He staggered down to rejoin his unit, refusing medical treatment until every one of his soldiers was accounted for and stabilized. By the time reinforcements arrived, Daniel's uniform was torn, bloodied, and coated in dust. His voice was hoarse, his body exhausted, but his spirit remained unbroken. He sat among his men, checking on each one, offering words of reassurance that carried more weight than any medal. They looked at him not just as their officer, but as the reason they were still breathing. When they returned to base that night, the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Daniel wrote in his journal by flashlight, his hand trembling. He wrote about the sacrifice, the fear, the courage of his men, and how proud he was to serve alongside them. He didn't write about himself. He never did. To him, the story was about the unit, not the man who led them through fire. Months later, when he returned home, the story reached the public. Reports detailed how Captain Daniel Morgan had led a counterassault under heavy fire, saved multiple wounded soldiers, and refused evacuation despite his own injuries. He was awarded the Silver Star, one of the nation's highest honors for valor. At the ceremony, he stood stiffly in his dress uniform, humbled and uncomfortable with the attention. Cameras flashed, speeches praised him as a hero, but when he spoke, his words were simple. "I did what any American soldier would do. I didn't fight alone. I fought with brothers who gave everything. This medal belongs to all of them." The crowd rose in applause, families of his men wept openly, and the nation looked at him with pride. In classrooms, his story was told as an example of leadership, courage, and sacrifice. In military academies, cadets studied his actions as a blueprint for command under fire. And in the quiet hearts of his soldiers, Daniel Morgan was more than a captain, he was the reason they made it home. Years later, when he visited the graves of those who hadn't survived other battles, he would kneel, touch the names etched in stone, and whisper promises never to forget. To America, he was a hero. To his men, he was a leader who proved that in the darkest valleys, true courage is not about medals or recognition, it is about standing unbroken when everything around you falls apart. And in that, America found pride, not only in one man, but in the spirit of service that lived through him.